So this whole mess started last week when I got this fancy cream envelope in the mail. I was actually kind of excited because I knew my brother Griffin was getting married soon and hadn't heard much about it. Opened it up and there's this beautiful invitation with all the fancy script and shit, and a bright yellow post-it note stuck to it that just said, "You're invited to park cars, not the reception." Like, what the actual fuck? I stared at it for like 5 minutes trying to process if this was some weird joke. Griffin and I have never been super close, but this seemed extreme even for him. So I called him thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding or his fiancée Victoria was behind it or something. Big mistake. He picks up and immediately starts laughing when I ask about the invitation. Then I hear him say, "Hold on, let me put you on speaker so everyone can hear this." And suddenly I can tell I'm on speaker with what sounds like my entire family. Griffin goes, "You're 33 and drive Uber. Finally you can be useful at my wedding." And everyone erupts in laughter. I'm not kidding. It sounded like a fucking sitcom laugh track. Then my mom, Catherine, chimes in with, "We already told everyone you're the hired help. Less embarrassing than admitting you're family." More laughter. My dad, Harvey, takes his turn. "At least you're good at something. Parking cars." Then my sister, Mabel, "We'll pay you $50. Probably more than your daily Uber earnings." I'm sitting there, gripping my phone so hard I thought it might crack, while they're all just taking turns making fun of me. Griffin tops it off with, "Wear a vest with valet so no one mistakes you for a guest." And they all just cackle like it's the funniest thing they've ever heard. Mom adds the final touch, "Oh, and park in the back. Use the service entrance." What none of them know or remembered is why I'm driving for Uber in the first place. 3 years ago, my dad had a major heart attack. Medical bills piled up fast. At the time, I had a solid job at an investment firm that I'd built up over 7 years. But my family was drowning in debt, so I cashed out my 401k, paid off their medical bills, and helped them stay afloat. The penalty for early withdrawal destroyed my savings, and then the recession hit, and I lost my position during layoffs. I started driving Uber to make ends meet while looking for another finance job. Meanwhile, I took what little I had left and made some careful investments on the side. One of those investments? A 40% ownership stake in Lakeside Manor, the exact venue where Griffin and Victoria are having their wedding. My family has no idea. They think I'm just some broke loser who drives people around all day. They've been treating me like shit for the past 2 years, making fun of me at every family gathering, acting like I'm some massive disappointment. After that phone call, I just smiled and said, "No thanks, you'll regret this sooner than you think," and hung up. Immediately, my phone started blowing up with texts. First angry ones like, "Who do you think you are?" and "Don't be so sensitive." Then, gradually shifting to, "Come on, we were just joking," and "Don't ruin this for Griffin." I ignored all of them and called my contact at Lakeside Manor, Lori. She's the venue manager and we've become friends since my investment. Told her exactly what happened and what I wanted to do. She was fucking livid on my behalf. Turns out Griffin and Victoria have been nightmare clients anyway, constantly demanding upgrades without paying, treating the staff like garbage, and acting entitled AF. Lori was more than happy to help me with my plan. First step, we're reviewing their contract for violations. And guess what? There are plenty. They've made multiple unauthorized changes, exceeded guest counts, and added demands not covered in their agreement. Normally, these would be overlooked with just additional fees, but now, we're enforcing everything. Second, I've instructed Lori to inform them that due to scheduling issues, they need to come in for an urgent meeting about their wedding arrangements, 3 days before the wedding. Third, I've blocked all their numbers, but I can see the notifications piling up. 27 missed calls just this afternoon. Emails, too. Apparently, there's some urgent situation with their venue. LOL. I know what you're thinking. Am I really going to mess with my brother's wedding? Fuck yes, I am. They wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone, make me park cars and enter through the service entrance like I'm nothing. The best part? I don't even have to do anything illegal or even that drastic. Just enforce the actual contract they signed and exercise my rights as a part owner. They're the ones who violated terms, made changes without approval, and treated venue staff like shit. Griffin just sent an email saying they're coming to my apartment tomorrow. Apparently, they've been trying to reach the owner of the venue to resolve whatever issues Lori brought up, but strangely, that person isn't responding to calls either because it's me. And I'm done being their family punching bag. My phone is vibrating nonstop right now. I'm watching Netflix and drinking a beer while they panic about their precious wedding falling apart. Tomorrow, I'll finally get to see their faces when they realize who they've been mocking all this time. Update tomorrow after they show up. This is gonna be good. Update 1. Holy shit, guys. The last 24 hours have been wild. So many of you asked for an update. And trust me, you're gonna want to hear what happened. So yesterday morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my apartment door, checked my phone, and saw 47 missed calls and like 100 texts. I took my time getting dressed, made coffee, and finally opened the door about 15 minutes later. Standing there was my sister Mabel, looking like she hadn't slept. She pushed past me into my apartment without even asking, and immediately started with the guilt trip, saying how selfish I was being, how I was ruining Griffin's special day, how mom was crying, blah, blah, blah. I just sipped my coffee and let her rant while she paced around my living room. When she finally stopped to breathe, I asked her exactly what the problem was with the venue. She gave me this look like I was the dumbest person alive and said they got some email about contract violations and possible cancellation. That's when things got interesting. She switched tactics completely, suddenly all sweet and concerned about me. Asked how I've been doing, if I needed money, said the family misses me at gatherings. I almost spit out my coffee. The audacity of this girl. Reminder, this is the same sister who, at Christmas last year, told our extended family that I was between jobs because I couldn't handle the pressure of real work. She conveniently left out the part where I sacrificed my career and savings to bail out our parents after Dad's heart attack. I looked her dead in the eyes and asked why she was really here. She broke pretty quick and admitted they needed me to talk to my friend, who works at the venue to smooth things over. Apparently, Lori had mentioned my name when they called panicking about the email. I played dumb. Asked her how she thought I could possibly help with venue management when I'm just a loser Uber driver who barely makes minimum wage. Her face got all red and flustered. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots of conversations in their family group chat. The one they kicked me out of last year when I couldn't contribute to Dad's birthday gift because I was broke from, paying his medical bills. The screenshots were them discussing how to handle me and get me to help. My mom suggesting they apologize, even if we don't mean it, and my dad saying, just offer him some cash, he's desperate enough to take it. The fucking kicker? Griffin wrote, if he helps fix this, maybe we can let him attend the reception after all. But still park the cars first, LMAO. I took her phone, read through it all carefully, and then handed it back without saying a word. Just smiled. She got all nervous and asked what I was going to do. Told her I'd think about it and get back to the family later. She tried to argue, but I opened my door and gestured for her to leave. She stomped out, saying I'd regret turning my back on family. About 2 hours later, my parents showed up. Mom was crying, fake tears, she does this, and Dad was doing his stern, disappointed look. I let them in because, honestly, I wanted to see how far they'd go with this charade. Mom immediately tried to hug me. She hasn't hugged me in like 3 years. While Dad stood there awkwardly looking around my apartment, she started saying how much they loved me, how they were just joking about the valet thing, how they always wanted me at the wedding. I asked why they told everyone I was hired help then. Dad cleared his throat and said they were embarrassed about my situation and didn't want to answer questions from family and friends about why their son was driving Uber at 33. So I reminded them why I was driving Uber. Laid it all out. How I'd drained my 401k, paid over $70,000 of their medical debt, lost my job in the recession, and had been struggling ever since while they acted ashamed of me. Mom tried to interrupt with excuses, but I just kept talking. Told them how for 3 years I'd been rebuilding from nothing, making investments where I could, driving Uber to pay rent, and dealing with their constant judgment. Dad finally asked point blank what it would take for me to help with the venue situation. I said I'd need to make some calls and ask them to leave. As soon as they left, I called Lori. Turns out Griffin and Victoria had been blowing up the venue's phone lines all morning. They were freaking out because Lori had sent them an itemized list of their contract violations with associated fees, totaling nearly $20,000 that would have to be paid immediately or the venue would cancel. These violations included exceeding guest count by 40 people, unauthorized menu changes, extended hours not covered in contract, special lighting. Requests added last-minute premium bar upgrade they'd requested but hadn't paid for. Lori was having the time of her life. She said Victoria had a complete meltdown on the phone, screaming about how her perfect day was being ruined. Then my cousin Bruce called. We've always been tight, even when the rest of the family was treating me like garbage. He's the only one who knew about my investment in the venue because he helped me with some of the paperwork. He was at my parents' house when Griffin and Victoria got back from meeting with Lori. Said they were in full panic mode. Victoria was crying to her parents, who were now threatening to pull their financial contribution. Griffin was desperately trying to find another venue with 6 days' notice. LOL, good luck. The best part? Bruce overheard Griffin finally admit to his future in-laws that the reason they were in this mess was because they'd tried to make me park cars instead of inviting me properly. Victoria's dad apparently went off on Griffin, asking what kind of person treats their brother that way. This morning, I finally decided to make my move. I texted Griffin that I might be able to help with the venue situation and to meet me at Lakeside Manor at noon. Told him to bring Mom, Dad, and Victoria. I got there early and met with Lori in her office. We went over the contract again and highlighted every single violation. Then, I signed some paperwork officially identifying myself as part owner. At exactly noon, they all arrived looking stressed as hell. Lori showed them into the conference room where I was sitting at the head of the table with all their paperwork spread out in front of me. The look on their faces when they walked in, I wish I could have taken a picture. Griffin actually stopped mid-step. Victoria's mouth fell open, and my parents just stood there looking confused. I gestured for them to sit down and said we should discuss the venue situation. Griffin started stammering, asking what I was doing there and why I was acting like I was in charge. That's when Lori handed them the ownership documents showing my 40% stake in Lakeside Manor. Dead fucking silence. I explained very calmly that as a significant owner, I had been reviewing their file and found numerous contract violations that would typically result in cancellation. Griffin started to say something, but Victoria kicked him under the table to shut him up. Then I laid out their options. Pay the $20,000 in fees immediately and address all violations. Find another venue with less than a week until the wedding. Work with me on a compromise. Victoria immediately asked about option 3. Smart girl. I said I'd waive all fees and ensure their wedding went perfectly as planned, but with 3 conditions. I attend as a guest, not staff. They publicly apologized to me at the rehearsal dinner. They admit to the family exactly why I've been struggling financially for the past 3 years. Griffin started to object, but Victoria cut him off and said they would agree to my terms. My parents sat there looking shell-shocked the entire time. As they were leaving, my dad pulled me aside and asked how long I'd owned part of the venue. Told him I bought in 2 years ago with what little investment money I had left after bailing them out. He just nodded and walked out. My phone's been blowing up all afternoon. Apparently, Griffin and Victoria have been calling family members to update them about the wedding. And somehow my name is coming up a lot. Bruce texted that Griffin is telling everyone a very edited version where he always wanted me at the wedding and there was just a miscommunication. Right. Tomorrow is the rehearsal dinner. Can't wait to hear their public apology. This isn't over yet, not by a long shot. Update 2. Okay, so the rehearsal dinner was last night and holy shit did things go off the rails. I'm still processing everything that happened, but I promised an update, so here we go. First off, I should mention that the dinner was at this fancy steakhouse that Victoria's parents picked out. Super expensive place with private rooms and everything. I showed up exactly on time, not early or late, wearing a decent button-down and slacks. Wanted to look good, but not like I was trying too hard, you know? When I walked in, the first person I saw was Griffin. He was standing by the entrance looking nervous AF, checking his watch every 5 seconds. As soon as he spotted me, he rushed over with this fake smile plastered on his face. He started with some BS small talk about the weather and traffic, then awkwardly patted my shoulder like we're buddies. I just stared at him until he got uncomfortable. Then he lowered his voice and asked if we could revise our agreement about the public apology. Said it might create unnecessary drama on what should be a happy occasion. I just laughed and walked past him into the private room. The look on everyone's faces when I walked in was priceless. My parents were mid-conversation with Victoria's parents and just stopped talking. Victoria was showing something on her phone to Mabel and immediately put it away. Several other people from the wedding party just kinda stared, probably wondering who I was. I recognized Victoria's parents from photos Griffin had shown me ages ago. Her dad is this tall, serious-looking guy named Richard, who apparently owns some kind of distribution company. Her mom, Elizabeth, was dressed like she was going to meet the queen or something. My mom, Catherine, rushed over and hugged me super tight like we're best friends, whispered in my ear that I should behave myself and not make a scene. I just smiled and said loud enough for people nearby to hear that I was looking forward to Griffin and Victoria's apology during dinner. Mom's face went white. She grabbed my arm and tried to pull me aside, but I shook her off and went to introduce myself to Victoria's parents. Figured they should know who they're really dealing with. Richard seemed surprised when I told him I was Griffin's brother. He said Griffin had mentioned a brother, but he didn't realize I would be at the rehearsal. Elizabeth asked what I do for work, and I told her straight up. I drive for Uber currently, but I also have some investments, including a stake in their wedding venue. Richard's eyebrows shot up at that. Could tell he was connecting dots in his head. Dinner itself was awkward as hell. I was seated between my cousin Bruce, the only family member who's had my back through everything, and one of Victoria's bridesmaids. My parents and Griffin kept shooting me nervous glances from across the table while trying to maintain conversation. About halfway through the main course, Richard stood up and tapped his glass for a toast. gave this whole speech about welcoming Griffin into their family, how excited they were for the wedding, usual stuff. Then he specifically looked at me and said he was glad all family members could be here for this special occasion. The look Griffin gave me could have melted steel. When Richard finished, I thought Griffin might actually make good on our deal and apologize. Instead, he stood up, thanked Richard, said some generic stuff about being happy, and sat back down without acknowledging me at all. I waited until there was a lull in conversation, then stood up with my water glass, said I wanted to share something special about my brother Griffin. Everyone got quiet. I started by saying how family means different things to different people, how some people stand by their family no matter what, while others only value family members who can benefit them in some way. Then, I reminded everyone about our agreement, that Griffin and Victoria would publicly apologize for trying to make me park cars instead of attending the wedding as a guest. Victoria's mom Elizabeth asked what I was talking about. Before Griffin could stop me, I pulled out my phone and showed her the invitation with the sticky note. Then, I played the recording of that phone call where they all laughed about making me use the service entrance. Yeah, I recorded that call. Probably should have mentioned that earlier. The room went dead silent. Victoria's dad Richard stood up, took the phone from me, and listened to part of it again. His face got redder with each second. He handed the phone back and asked Griffin if that was really him on the recording. Griffin started stammering about how it was just a joke, how they never meant it, how I was taking things out of context. Victoria jumped in trying to smooth things over, saying they were under a lot of stress planning the wedding. That's when Elizabeth asked directly about the comment my mom made about it being less embarrassing than admitting your family. Mom tried to explain it away as just teasing, but Richard wasn't having it. He asked me point blank why my family would treat me that way. So I told him everything about Dad's heart attack, how I drained my savings and 401k to help them, how I lost my job during layoffs, how they've been treating me like garbage ever since I started driving Uber to make ends meet. My dad Harvey suddenly stood up and shouted that I was exaggerating, that they'd paid me back, complete lie, and that I was just jealous of Griffin's success. I laughed and asked him exactly how much they'd paid back of the $70,000 I gave them. He couldn't answer, just stood there opening and closing his mouth like a fish. Victoria's parents exchanged this look that said volumes. Richard excused himself and asked Victoria and her mom to join him outside. Griffin followed them, looking panicked. While they were gone, my mom hissed at me that I was ruining everything. Mabel called me selfish and said I could have handled this privately. I reminded them that publicly humiliating me had been their idea in the first place. Bruce, bless him, backed me up, told everyone how he'd seen firsthand how they treated me over the past few years, how they excluded me from family events or made fun of me when I did show up. When Griffin and Victoria came back, they looked shell-shocked. Victoria's parents weren't with them. Griffin grabbed me by the arm and dragged me outside into the hallway, shoved me against the wall, and got in my face, saying I'd crossed the line. That Victoria's dad was threatening to pull all financial support for the wedding. I told him that wasn't my problem. He threw a punch that I easily dodged. He's never been athletic. And he hit the wall instead, started cursing and holding his hand while I just stood there watching him fall apart. Victoria came out and saw him cradling his hand, immediately assumed I'd hurt him somehow. Started yelling at me about how I was trying to ruin their special day out of spite. I showed her the recording again. Reminded her that they started this, not me. She broke down crying, saying her parents were furious and considering not even attending the wedding. Said her dad called Griffin's behavior disgusting and was questioning what kind of family they were marrying into. That's when my parents burst into the hallway. Mom was crying, Dad was red-faced and pointing his finger in my face, saying I'd gone too far, that family problems should stay private. I reminded him that they were perfectly happy to humiliate me publicly, but couldn't take the same in return. The restaurant manager eventually came over and asked us to keep it down or leave. We all went back inside where the remaining guests were sitting in uncomfortable silence. The dinner ended early with Victoria's parents paying the bill and leaving without saying goodbye to anyone from our family. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. As I was leaving, Griffin grabbed my shoulder and said this wasn't over, told me he'd make me regret this for the rest of my life. I just smiled and reminded him that I still owned 40% of his venue and that the wedding was still 2 days away. Got a call from Bruce this morning saying Victoria's parents are having an emergency meeting with Griffin and our parents today. Apparently, they're considering canceling the entire wedding unless amends are made and the family situation is resolved. Griffin called me 6 times already, left voicemails alternating between threatening me and begging me to talk to Victoria's parents, to tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Lori from the venue texted that Victoria's mom called, asking about refund policies if they cancel within 48 hours of the event. I'm not backing down. They wanted to treat me like hired help? Fine. Now they get to see what it's like when the help decides not to show up for work. Wedding is supposed to be day after tomorrow. We'll see if it actually happens. Final update. Wedding day has come and gone, and I still can't believe what happened. Grab some popcorn, this is going to be a wild ride. The morning started with a text from Lori saying Victoria's parents decided not to cancel the wedding after all. Apparently, they didn't want their daughter to lose her dream venue and the deposits they'd paid. But they had conditions. Big ones. While I was getting ready, my dad called. Didn't answer. Then he texted saying he was outside my apartment and needed to talk man to man. Figured I might as well hear what he had to say, so I let him up. Dad looked like shit TBH. Unshaven, bags under his eyes, wearing the same shirt from yesterday. He sat on my couch without being invited and just stared at the floor for a minute. Finally, he asked how I could afford to buy into Lakeside Manor. I told him I'd been investing whatever extra cash I had after paying rent and bills. He nodded, then asked why I never told them about it. I laughed and said, why would I? So they could ask for more money. Or so they could pretend to be proud of me after years of treating me like garbage. Then he said something that actually surprised me. He admitted he was jealous. Said watching me succeed so young in finance while he was still paying off his second mortgage at 55 had been hard on his ego. When I gave up everything to help after his heart attack, it actually made him feel better in some twisted way. He said when I started driving Uber, he and Mom used it to feel superior again. Like they could point at me as the cautionary tale of what happens when you make bad choices. I asked if he thought sacrificing everything to save him from medical bankruptcy was a bad choice. He didn't have an answer. Then he finally got to the point. Victoria's parents had given Griffin an ultimatum. Either they make things right with me, or they wouldn't pay for anything. And apparently they were paying for about 75% of this wedding. I told him I wasn't interested in playing nice just to save Griffin's wedding. He nodded like he expected that answer, then dropped the bomb. Griffin wasn't just marrying Victoria. He was marrying into her family's business. Richard had been planning to bring Griffin into his company, set him up for eventual takeover. That's why Griffin was so desperate for this wedding to go perfectly. He wasn't just getting a wife, he was getting a career. I told Dad I'd think about it and see him at the venue. As he was leaving, he handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000. He said it was the first payment on what they owed me, and that he and Mom would work out a plan to pay back the rest over time. Too little too late, but I took it anyway. Got to the venue early to check in with Lori. She filled me in on what had been happening behind the scenes. Victoria's parents had basically taken control of the entire wedding. They were now paying for everything directly to vendors, not giving Griffin or my parents any access to funds. Lori also told me that after the rehearsal dinner disaster, Richard had a private meeting with Griffin where he laid out exactly what kind of behavior he expected from his future son-in-law. Whatever was said in that meeting had Griffin shook. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m. Guests started arriving around 3. I decided to hang back in Lori's office to avoid any pre-wedding drama. At 3:30, there was a knock on the office door. It was Victoria, alone, in her wedding dress. She asked if she could talk to me. She looked nervous but determined. She apologized for how everything went down. Said she got caught up in wedding planning stress and let Griffin convince her that excluding me was no big deal. Said she should have stood up to him when he suggested making me park cars. I appreciated her coming to talk to me directly, but told her I wasn't really the one she should be apologizing to. The venue staff were the ones Griffin and her had been treating like crap for months. She winced at that, but nodded. Said she'd already spoken to them and offered a significant tip for everyone working today. Then she asked if I would walk her down the aisle. I nearly choked. Asked what about her dad. She said her dad would be there, but she wanted to make a statement to Griffin and my family about where she stood on this whole mess. It was a power move, and I respected it. Told her I'd do it. Ceremony time came. I could see my mom's face when Victoria walked in on my arm instead of just with her dad. She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Griffin went pale, then red, then composed himself when he caught Richard watching him. During the reception, everything seemed normal on the surface, but there was this weird tension underneath. Extended family members kept coming up to me saying they hadn't seen me in ages, asking what I'd been up to. Clearly, they'd all heard something but weren't sure what version to believe. My cousin Bruce was having the time of his life watching it all unfold. He kept bringing me drinks and pointing out people's awkward reactions whenever I was mentioned. Dinner was served, and then it was time for speeches. Richard went first, giving a surprisingly warm toast to the couple. Then he specifically thanked me for ensuring the venue was available despite some last-minute complications. Several people looked confused at that. Griffin's best man gave a generic speech. Then, Victoria's maid of honor shared some stories about their friendship. Finally, Griffin stood up to give his groom's speech. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked Victoria's parents for their generosity, and then, looking directly at me, thanked his brother for being there on his special day. Said family was complicated but important, and that he had some making up to do. It wasn't the public apology we'd agreed on, but it was something. I could tell it physically pained him to say even that much. After dinner, my mom cornered me by the bar. She was already a few glasses of wine in and started whisper yelling about how I'd humiliated the family. I just stared at her until she ran out of steam, then asked if she ever considered that maybe they had humiliated me first. She started crying, saying she was just trying to protect the family's reputation. I asked her whose reputation she was protecting when she told people I was hired help instead of her son. She didn't have an answer for that. The real showdown came during the dancing. I was sitting at a table with Bruce when Griffin came over and asked to talk privately. We stepped outside onto the venue's patio. He immediately started in about how I'd nearly ruined everything, how Victoria's dad was making him sign some kind of contract before joining the family business, how mom and dad were fighting because of me. I let him rant for a bit, then just held up my hand to stop him. Told him none of this was because of me. It was because of him and his decisions. He'd chosen to treat me like shit, chosen to lie to his fiance's family, chosen to pretend I was somehow less than him because I was driving Uber. Then, I told him something he didn't know. I'd been offered a job last week with an investment group. All those small investments I'd been making while driving, they'd caught someone's attention. I was going back to finance with a better position than I'd had before. I didn't tell him because I wanted his approval or because I needed him to know I was successful again. I told him because I wanted him to understand that his entire view of me was based on assumptions and his own insecurity. He just stood there, mouth slightly open. Then he asked if I would sell him my share of the venue as a wedding gift. The fucking audacity of this guy. I laughed in his face, told him I'd consider selling my share, but only at market value plus a family discount of an additional 50%. He started to argue but then just deflated. Asked why I hated him so much. I told him I didn't hate him. I just didn't respect him. There's a difference. As the night wound down, Victoria's dad sought me out. We ended up talking business for almost an hour. Turns out he'd done some digging into my background and investment history. Said he was impressed by how I'd managed to rebuild after liquidating everything for family. He slipped me his business card. Said if I ever wanted to discuss potential opportunities, his door was open. Pretty sure that was the final nail in Griffin's coffin. The wedding ended without any major disasters. Victoria seemed happy, Griffin seemed humbled, and my parents seemed like they'd aged 10 years in 1 week. As I was leaving, Lori handed me an envelope. Inside was a copy of the venue contract with Griffin's signatures, along with a note from her saying they'd documented all the violations and special accommodations made, just in case anyone tried to spin this story differently later. It's been 3 days since the wedding. Griffin and Victoria are on their honeymoon. My parents have been unusually quiet. Mabel sent a text saying we need to talk, but I haven't responded. I cashed Dad's check yesterday. It's a start, I guess. Bruce wants me to come to his place for dinner next weekend to celebrate my new job. Revenge is a weird thing. I didn't stop the wedding or ruin Griffin's big day like part of me wanted to, but I did something better. I forced them all to see me as I really am, not as the convenient loser they'd made me out to be. And honestly, watching them squirm while having to treat me with respect was way more satisfying than any canceled wedding could have been.